Acadian Cultural Center. The short story is that they came from Western France and they settled in Nova Scotia. And then eventually England got control of Canada, and a lot of the people in Nova Scotia didn't want to swear allegiance to England and the Church of England, etc., etc., etc. So the British put them on boats and shipped them out and dumped them off all over the world. A whole bunch of them ended up finding their way down to New Orleans, which is another French area now, or then. And what we know today is Cajun, is the descendants of the Acadians. Another fountain, as it were, at a golf course. The Alexandria Historical and Genealogical Library and Museum. Upstairs they have all the genealogy stuff, and downstairs in the basement they have a museum with collections of stuff that's been donated over the years. Don't walk too fast, we don't want to catch up with this guy. Where is he going? Nice mural on the side of the building. This is northwest Louisiana, and they actually have land that isn't all flooded with alligators everywhere. They grow crops. Both sides of the street. Got a nice river. They do a lot of hip roof houses down here. I don't know quite why. But this guy's got flashing lights. What's he doing? Oh, they got horses too. Louisiana has cows. Who knew? Oakland Plantation was founded in 1785 with a Spanish-era land grant, and it continued on until through the Civil War, and then up until the 1960s, when the last tenant farmer moved off the plantation, and they continued farming here until the 80s, and then the National Park Service bought the property in when?
1998.
So if you get confused, if you have questions, it's just you guys.
Right.
This is your private personal
Right.
tour. Ask me questions, please. All of our buildings are set up the way they look like in the 1960s. A lot of people come to a plantation and expect the 1860s, like pre-Civil War, but this was a working plantation. You know, this was run by human labor until the 1960s, and so people were living in these buildings. They were modifying them, changing them. Some of them get moved to lots of different pronunciations of it. The French version being the pigeonnier. It's a pigeon house. They raised pigeons here.
Why? What was?
They ate them. It's a food source. Sorry.
Right.
Any French visitor would see a pigeonnier and immediately associate it with wealth. And so that's like having a Ferrari or a log nest. In that 1 year, for $45,000 in 1860s money. That's the equivalent of $1.5 million today. So we're talking, that is 1 year's crop with very little overhead, basically all profit. Is currently our facility offices, because it had been renovated so much, it looked nothing like it did historically. Mud, Spanish moss, animal hair, you can see the fibers in it. The Spanish moss and everything in there acts as a binding agent. You mix that all together with some water, you turn it into basically Play-Doh, and you smush it between the framework of the house. So you can kind of see in the bedroom there, we have the, what today would be your 2x4 framing, and then everything in between. So you would make this Play-Doh-like consistency, you'd make it into big logs, and you drape it over here. This forms your internal structure. You smush it to get it to a nice flat wall, and kind of like adobe. It dries rock hard, it acts as a great insulator, and it lasts forever.
Right, it does things. It seems to last.
It does.
Supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good way to tell, to be able to date a building in Louisiana. So if it's bousillage, it's almost always pre-Civil War. You rarely saw bousillage being used after the Civil War. Things like that. And so that's all we know. You know, that's kind of what we've got. But most people didn't want to have anything, didn't figure it was important, there was no point in writing stuff down, so that's what you're left with.
We said, we did go to talk plantations we went to the Whitney plantation.
Oh, no.
And the best sight of all is always the motorhome. This portion of Louisiana used to be plantations. Now it's farms. But you can understand why they grew stuff here. Unlike the southern part where it was all bayous. We went to the Cane River Creole National Historic Park, Oakland Plantation. And now we're stopping at the Cane River Creole National Historic Park, Magnolia Plantation. We won't be able to get a tour here. There's no one working here today, but we can walk around and see the place, and it's a good place to stop for lunch. Worked as a sharecropper, and they paid you in script. You spent it at their store at prices that they set. And at the end of the year, amazingly, no matter how hard you worked, you didn't make any money. One crib where you would have piled your corn, let it dry out. And this should be the blacksmith shop. Who wouldn't want to be a plantation owner? Do whatever you want and have a couple hundred people work for you that do all the work and make you very rich. If a working person today makes $80,000 a year, and you could, instead of paying them $80,000 a year, you could have them as a slave. It might cost you $15,000 a year to feed them and house them, but the rest of the money you get to keep. You do that for 100 or 200 slaves, you can get rich very quickly. Sounds like a good deal for the plantation owner, and not such a good deal for the slaves. And then after they did away with slavery, after the Civil War, they all became free, but they didn't have any education. They didn't have any money to leave and go anywhere else. They didn't have any place to go. All their family was either here or on some neighboring plantation, any family that they knew of. So they stayed around and they worked for the farmers, and they got theoretically paid, but they got paid in script that they had to spend at the company store. And then at the end of the year, it all worked out, and the planter told them how much money they made or lost. And it amazingly turned out that they never really made very much money. At the end of the year, the stuff they had bought from the store was worth more than the labor that they had spent working all year. So at the end of the year, they owed the planter money instead of him owing them money. Yeah, sounds like a good deal, doesn't it? I mean, if you're a planter. That is the hospital / overseer's house. When it was a plantation, they had so many slaves, they had a hospital. So if you were very sick as a slave and you literally couldn't work, they would put you in the hospital because they didn't want you to die, because you were worth too much money if you recovered. So they took care of you to make sure you didn't die. Then they put you back out in the fields. But eventually it became an overseer's house. Overseer is basically the guy that gets to do all the dirty work of overseeing all the slaves. Because the plantation owner didn't want to get involved in the day-to-day operations of going out and whipping everybody to make them work. They hire somebody for that job. This plantation had brick houses for the slaves. The slaves probably made the bricks, built the houses, and then they got to live in them. How exciting. In the land between the slave cabins, where the slaves were allowed to have a garden to grow themselves some food, because if you're the plantation owner, you don't want to have to feed them all, so you give them a minimum amount of food and you let them grow more food themselves. It's the least you can do. You don't want them to starve to death. They're your property. Originally, these were the slave quarters. They're now displayed as they would have been in the 1950s and 1960s, when they were used by day laborer farmers that worked on the farm. So these people, unlike the slaves, they had things like a stove and chairs and tables and some other furniture. when it was slave quarters, the slaves would have just had a place on the floor, and they would have made a bed out of corn husks and rags, and they would have slept there, and they would have got up and they would have worked all day, and they would have come back, tended their garden and slept all night and get up and did it again. Isn't America great? Their water, you say? Well, it turns out that the groundwater and the river water, the river's right across the street, they were too contaminated to drink. So they had cisterns. This one's now been filled in so nobody falls in. But they collected all the rainwater off the roof of the buildings and they piped it over to the cisterns. And that's where they got their drinking water and cooking water, etc. Big equipment with big belts. They started off with small mule-powered equipment, but over the years they did steam engines, etc. In the beginning, one slave could pick the seeds out of 1 pound of cotton a day. And then after Eli Whitney in 1794 invented the cotton gin short for engine, they could get up to 50 pounds of cotton a day. And then after the Civil War, things became mechanized. They had steam engines and they had big mills like this, and they could do today electronic cotton gins can produce 500-pound bales in an hour, as opposed to 1 pound a day. Mechanization has its advantages. Here's a bale of cotton. That's tightly packed, but there's no seeds in it. As opposed to the raw cotton off the plant. Can't see them in the video, but inside each one of these white lumps is a seed. First of all, there's the levee to keep the water in. There's the Mississippi River. And effectively, right about, there's a line, Mississippi, entering Mississippi. High banks on this side of the Mississippi River. Well, the Mississippi had a high bank on this shore, and we're actually going up and down a little hill. I feel like I'm in America again.